Context-free grammar versus Chomsky normal form. So if we want to convert a CFG into a CNF, then we will have to follow a few of the steps. So if we have a S at the right hand side in CFG, then we will have to create a new production rule with name S dash in CNF, which gives only S as a value. Alright. So again, in the second step, if we have an epsilon generating production rule in CFG, then in CNF we will have to eliminate this epsilon. Again, if we have a unit production, what it does mean by unit production? Unit production means if we have a single non-terminal variable at the right hand side of any production rule in CFG, then we will have to remove that production. We will have to remove that single production as well in CNF. Again, if we have more than two non-terminal variables at the right hand side of a production rule in CFG, then we will have to derivate them to only two non-terminal variables at the right hand side of a production rule in CNF. And at last, if we have more than one terminal at the right hand side of a production rule, or we have a combination of a non-terminal and a terminal variable at the right hand side, then we will again have to derivate them to a single terminal or a combination of two non-terminal variables at the right hand side for production rule in CNF. So let's start with the null removal process, which is the second step. In the first step, we only have supposed to create this S dash production rule in case we have S at the right hand side of a production rule in CFG. If we don't, then we do not have to follow this step. In the second step, we only follow this step if we have epsilon at the right hand side of a production rule in CFG. If we don't, then we also going to eliminate this step or ignore this step. We will head over to the third step. If we do not have a single production at the right hand side of a production rule, then we will again ignore this step. But here we are going to take the null production example. So to remove null, here we are. To remove null, we have to replace the null generating production rules variable with epsilon and all the other given production rules. So here we have been given a CFG in which the first production rule S gives small a and a capital A. Again, in the second production rule, A gives a small a and a capital A bar epsilon. So here we find the null production. So what our task is, we have to remove this epsilon from the grammar. So to remove this epsilon, what we have just read above, we have to replace this A with epsilon in our grammar to convert it into CNF. So let's check its CNF form, how we have converted it. Let's see the first production rule. Here we have written the grammar as it is. This is the first production rule of CFG, right? But what we done, we added a bar, then after bar we only wrote A, which is a single terminal, and we didn't write capital A, which gives epsilon, because we have replaced it with epsilon and we do not have to write epsilon with A, because by default we know there is a epsilon but we don't have to write it. Alright, if there is nothing and we have to replace it, and for suppose there is only a single A which is producing epsilon in the grammar, then we will write epsilon. Alright, but here we have a small a, then we didn't write the epsilon, we just write small a and replace the capital A with epsilon by default. Alright, it means we didn't have to write it only because we have another variable to write. If we didn't, then we will surely write it and we have to write it. Okay, in the second production rule, what we did is we write the starting of the rule as it is, small a and capital A, right? But we replace A with epsilon again, and after bar we only write small a terminal, and then we remove the epsilon from the grammar successfully. So here is the process to remove the null production from CFG.